Some stories are so astonishing, so filled with twists and turns that they almost defy belief. They seem too cinematic to be real, as if they were written for the silver screen rather than lived out in the real world. The life of Frank William Abagnale Jr. is one of these stories, a tale so wild, so improbable that it's hard to imagine it actually happened. If you've seen the film Catch Me If You Can, you already know the spectacle of charm and audacious deception that made Frank's story famous. But what you might not know is that the real events behind the Hollywood magic are even more extraordinary, filled with moments of vulnerability, desperation, and sheer ingenuity. The truth behind the glamour is even more remarkable, more human, and more complex than any script could capture. Frank's story isn't just about a criminal mastermind outsmarting the law, it's about a teenager, barely more than a boy, lost in a world of adults, running from a broken home and a fractured childhood. He didn't set out to be a criminal. He ran from pain, confusion, and the chaos of his parents' divorce, and in its place, he built a series of fantastic lives, each more daring than the last. Before he was even old enough to legally drink, Frank had already reinvented himself as a Pan Am pilot, a pediatric doctor, and a Harvard-educated lawyer. Roles that demanded not just nerve, but a genius for observation and improvisation. Frank's true genius was understanding that people see what they expect to see. If you look the part, speak with confidence, and act as if you belong, the world rarely questions you. His cons weren't born of greed or malice, but of survival, a desperate attempt to find security and identity in a world that had left him adrift. This is the story of that incredible chase, from the bustling streets of New York to the quiet towns of Georgia, from university lecture halls to the cockpit of a 707, and everywhere in between. We'll follow a boy who became a man by pretending, and the relentless FBI agent who made it his mission to catch him, two lives intertwined by a game of cat and mouse. Sometimes the most unbelievable tales are true, and the most brilliant minds come from the most unexpected places, shaped not by privilege, but by adversity and imagination. Prepare for a story of reinvention, redemption, and remarkable nerve. This is the legend of Frank Abagnale Jr., and it's time to begin. Every grand performance has a beginning. Before the applause, before the spotlight, there's a moment of silence, a breath held in anticipation. For some, that moment is filled with hope. For others, it's heavy with uncertainty. For Frank, it started on the restless streets of New York, a city that never slept, where dreams and desperation walked hand in hand. The city's energy was electric, but for a young boy like Frank, it could also feel overwhelming and cold. After his parents' divorce shattered his world, Frank found himself adrift, searching for stability in a place that offered none. The rain on the window mirrored the storm inside him, loneliness, confusion, and a longing to belong. At 16, with nothing but an empty checkbook and a head full of worry, Frank learned a hard truth. A broke teenager is invisible in a world that values only what you can offer. He was desperate, but invisible, an outsider looking in. He started writing bad checks out of necessity, each signature a silent plea for a second chance. But it didn't take long for Frank to realize that survival required more than just boldness. It demanded credibility, and the world trusted only those who looked the part. By altering his driver's license, he added a decade to his age. Suddenly, doors that were once closed began to open. He was no longer dismissed as a kid, he was treated as an adult, and with that came new opportunities and new risks. This small act of forgery unlocked doors he never imagined. His checks were accepted, and he discovered that confidence, real or faked, was its own kind of currency. People believed what they saw, and Frank learned to show them exactly what they wanted. Frank wasn't just faking checks, he was faking an identity, slipping into new roles with every passing day. He became a chameleon, adapting to survive, learning to blend in and stand out all at once. He became a man of means, respected and trusted, all through a powerful transformation. The boy who once felt invisible was now the center of attention, moving through the world with a confidence that was both real and imagined. These early deceptions planted a seed. Frank had a talent for observation and mimicry, picking up on the smallest details, how people spoke, how they moved, what they expected from someone in charge. He learned to reflect people's expectations back at them, building believable personas from scratch. Every new encounter was a lesson, every mistake a step closer to mastery. A confident smile and steady hand proved more persuasive than money in the bank. Frank realized that trust could be manufactured, and that sometimes the illusion was more powerful than the truth. This was the moment the boy disappeared, and the master impersonator began to emerge. The shadows of his past faded as he stepped into the light of his own making. Frank was ready for bigger, bolder roles on the world stage. The city was no longer a maze, it was a theater, and he was determined to play the lead. The world would never see him as just a runaway again. He was rewriting his story one daring act at a time, and the headlines were only the beginning. He was about to become someone no one could ignore. Every room he entered, every eye that followed him was proof that he had become the person he always wanted to be, at least on the outside. And he was just getting started. The world was his stage, and Frank was ready to perform. Tired of small-time grifts and the constant fear of getting caught, Frank set his sights higher, on becoming a Pan Am pilot. The idea was as bold as it was outrageous, but for Frank, it was the ultimate challenge. He wanted more than just quick cash. He craved respect, adventure, and a taste of the high life that seemed reserved for the elite. In the 1960s, airline pilots were admired, trusted, and traveled the world for free. They were seen as modern-day explorers, symbols of sophistication and authority. Frank saw the uniform as his ticket to a new life, a way to reinvent himself and leave his old identity behind. Using his charm and quick thinking, he managed to convince Pan Am's purchasing department to send him a real pilot's uniform, all by providing a fake employee number he'd made up on the spot. It was a risky move, but Frank thrived on risk. With the uniform on, he transformed into First Officer Frank Williams. The crisp jacket, gold stripes, and cap gave him instant credibility. Suddenly doors opened and people treated him with deference. To complete the illusion, he forged a pilot's license and FAA ID, carefully copying every detail. He even learned the lingo and technical jargon by striking up conversations with real pilots in airport lounges, absorbing everything he could. That's when he discovered deadheading, the practice of pilots flying for free in spare seats, often in the cockpit jump seat. It was the perfect loophole, allowing him to travel the world without ever buying a ticket. For 2 years, Frank lived as a Pan Am pilot, deadheading on over 250 flights to 26 countries. He experienced the thrill of international travel, luxury hotels, and the respect that came with the uniform, all before his 21st birthday. Despite all the opportunities, he never actually flew a plane. Whenever invited to take the controls, he skillfully deflected, always finding a clever excuse to avoid exposure. His uniform was the ultimate disguise, letting him cash fraudulent payroll checks at banks around the world. The trust people placed in the Pan Am brand and its pilots made his scams almost effortless. Frank had achieved the impossible, a teenager trusted as a symbol of authority in the skies, moving through airports with the confidence of someone twice his age. His confidence, meticulous attention to detail, and relentless preparation kept him one step ahead of suspicion. Every forged document, every story was carefully crafted. The world believed in the illusion. To everyone around him, Frank was the real deal, a trusted pilot, a world traveler, and a man of mystery. And for Frank Abagnale, this was only the beginning. The sky was no longer the limit, it was just the start of his incredible journey. Even the glamorous life of a pilot grew exhausting. Frank needed a new role. In Georgia, he impulsively claimed to be a doctor on a rental application. Soon, he was supervising interns at a hospital, despite knowing nothing about medicine. He let real doctors handle emergencies, reading medical textbooks at night to keep up the act. A near tragedy with a newborn convinced him to leave before disaster struck. Next, to impress a woman and her lawyer father, Frank claimed a Harvard law degree. He crammed for and passed the Louisiana bar exam after 3 tries, landing a job at the Attorney General's office. His work was mostly research and errands, but a real Harvard grad grew suspicious. Sensing the net closing in, Frank vanished again. Each new identity was more daring than the last. He was always one step ahead, reinventing himself before anyone could catch up. But the risks were growing. Frank's real genius wasn't just in impersonation, it was in check forgery. He mastered the details of the banking system, learning that the magnetic ink line, not the signature, was key. By altering routing numbers, he sent checks on wild goose chases, buying himself time to disappear. Frank became an expert printer, creating flawless payroll checks and even soaking real checks in chemicals to reuse the paper. His boldest scam, printing his own deposit slips and slipping them into bank counters, rerouting deposits into his account. His forgeries were masterpieces, always a step ahead of bank security. Confidence and quality forgery fooled even the most diligent tellers. He cashed checks worth thousands, building a paper empire. Frank's attention to detail and understanding of human nature made him unstoppable, but every empire eventually attracts attention. Every great fugitive needs a great pursuer. For Frank, that was FBI agent Carl Hanratty. Hanratty, a bank fraud specialist, was assigned to the case after Frank's checks flooded the system. At first he chased a ghost. No name, no photo, just a trail of baffled victims and forged checks. Hanratty's most famous, near-miss Frank, caught in a hotel, pretended to be a Secret Service agent and walked out past the real FBI. The chase became personal. Hanratty respected Frank's nerve and intelligence, realizing he was after a brilliant teenager, not a hardened criminal. The pursuit was now about understanding as much as catching. Hanratty saw through the disguises to the lonely, clever boy beneath. The chase was on and their paths would cross again. It was only a matter of time. With the FBI closing in, Frank took his show on the road. Europe became his new playground. He settled in Montpellier, France, living quietly but still forging checks to fund his lifestyle. European banks' lax security made his scams easier, but law enforcement was catching up. Interpol and the FBI shared his file. His aliases were now on watch lists across the continent. Frank's luck ran out when a former girlfriend and Air France attendant recognized him on a wanted poster and tipped off police. In 1969, at just 21, Frank was arrested in France. There was no dramatic escape, just a quiet, definitive capture. The boy who'd lived a dozen lives was now a prisoner. His incredible run was over, but his story wasn't finished. Frank's capture in France led to a brutal stint in Perpignan prison, dark, cold, and inhumane. After 6 months, he was extradited to Sweden, where prison was more humane, but his stay was brief. The US wanted him back. On the flight home, Frank escaped through the plane's toilet at JFK but was soon recaptured. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. But the FBI saw value in his skills. They brought him forged checks from a tough case. Frank instantly identified the forger's methods, impressing the agents. They offered him a deal, served the rest of his sentence helping the FBI catch other forgers. The ultimate twist, the man they chased became their most valuable asset. Frank traded his cell for an office and his life of crime for a new purpose. The poacher had become the gamekeeper. His insight would change law enforcement forever. Redemption was within reach. Frank's story was about to take its most unexpected turn. Frank accepted the FBI's offer, working without pay to help catch forgers and con artists. His old nemesis became his mentor and friend. Frank brought the criminal's perspective to law enforcement, revolutionizing anti-fraud efforts. He lectured at the FBI Academy, developed security features for checks, and founded a consulting firm advising banks worldwide. His story is a testament to reinvention and second chances. Frank turned his criminal skills into a force for good, paying his debt to society by preventing the crimes he once committed. The tale of is more than a thrilling adventure. It's a story of identity, redemption, and the power to change. Frank Abagnale Jr. proved it's never too late to rewrite your story. He outwitted the FBI, but his greatest trick was transforming his life. Sometimes the most brilliant minds are forged in the most unconventional fires.